My mother kicked me out after finding out that I am pregnant and called me a disgrace. Now she wants to be in my daughter's life after finding out who her father is. I was 18 when I told my mother I was pregnant. She gave me 2 hours to pack and get out. Said I'd chosen to be I could figure out the consequences alone. Changed the locks while I sat on the front step with 2 garbage bags of clothes and nowhere to go. My daughter's father was a one-night thing during freshman orientation at college. I didn't even know his last name, just that he went by Alex and was visiting from Switzerland. Never saw him again after that night. Didn't have his number, didn't know his school, nothing. I dropped out, moved into a shelter, had Jana alone in a county hospital while my mother told everyone I'd run off to be a stripper in Vegas. 5 years of absolute hell followed, waiting tables at a diner where customers grabbed my ass for $2 tips, living in a studio apartment with black mold and roaches, Jana sleeping in a dresser drawer because I couldn't afford a crib, food stamps, WIC appointments, walking 4 miles to work because the bus didn't run that early. My mother lived 20 minutes away in her 4-bedroom house, never called, never visited, told family I was dead to her. My sister Renee would secretly meet me at parks, bring Jana clothes from consignment shops, but she was too scared to do more. Mom had threatened to cut her off too if she helped me. I made it work though, got my GED through an online program while John slept, started community college when she turned 3, found better waitressing jobs, saved every penny, moved us to a safer apartment. Jana was brilliant, funny, started reading at 4, could do basic math before kindergarten. Everything I did was for her. Last month, a man walked into the restaurant where I worked. Expensive suit, Swiss accent, kept staring at me. Finally asked if I'd gone to State University 5 years ago. My heart stopped. It was Alex, but now he went by Alessandro Moretti. His family owned a luxury hotel chain across Europe. He'd been trying to find me for 2 years after his cousin showed him my picture from the university's orientation archive. He'd hired investigators, searched social media, spent thousands trying to track down a girl he'd spent one night with because he couldn't forget me. I told him about Lily, showed him her picture. He cried right there in the restaurant. His father had been pressuring him to marry some A's, but Alessandro had refused, kept thinking about the American girl who'd quoted Shakespeare while drunk and laughed at his terrible jokes. He wanted to meet Lily immediately. Within a week, he'd set up a trust fund for her, bought us a house, insisted on back paying 5 years of child support at $10,000 a month. His family flew in from Switzerland, embraced Jana like she'd always existed, showered her with presents and affection. That's when my mother reappeared. She showed up at my new house with flowers and tears, saying she'd been wrong. She'd missed us so much. Family should forgive. The neighbors had told her about the Mercedes in my driveway, the Swiss license plates, the delivery trucks from high-end stores. She'd done her research, found out exactly who Alessandro was, what his family was worth. She wanted to be part of Jana's life now that Jana came with a trust fund and Swiss finishing school potential. I let her in, let her talk. She went on about second chances, how young I'd been, how she'd only wanted what was best. Then she saw Jana's picture with Damon's family at their Swiss estate, and her eyes lit up. "We should plan her 6th birthday together," she said. "Maybe in Switzerland. I've always wanted to see Geneva." That's when Alessandro walked in from the kitchen. He'd heard everything. My mother practically glowed, extended her hand, started gushing about her precious granddaughter. Alessandra looked at her hand like it was covered in sewage. "You're the woman who threw out your pregnant daughter?" he asked quietly. My mother stammered about tough love, teaching responsibility. Damon pulled out his phone, showed her something. Her face went pale. "This is the police report from the shelter where your daughter spent her first month homeless. It lists her as an abandoned youth. This is the social services file showing she applied for emergency housing while 8 months pregnant. This is the hospital record showing she gave birth alone while listed as indigent. Would you like me to continue?" My mother tried to explain, but Damon cut her off. He swiped to another screen and turned it toward her, his voice still quiet but cutting. The shelter intake form filled the display with my name at the top and a red checkbox next to abandoned minor. My mother opened her mouth, but Damon spoke over her, asking if she'd like him to continue through the 5 years of documentation his investigators had compiled. I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, both hands gripping the frame, watching her face cycle through one excuse after another. She tried explaining that she hadn't understood how bad things really were, that she assumed I'd figure it out on my own, that she'd been angry and scared herself. Damon kept scrolling through screen after screen, without ever breaking eye contact with her, pulling up hospital records and social services files the way someone presents evidence in a courtroom. My mother's makeup began to run, tears mixing with the foundation she'd carefully applied before showing up. Then she shifted tactics completely, reaching for me with shaking hands, saying she'd been terrified, that she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd thought about me every single day. I stepped back before she could touch me, and my voice came out steadier than I expected when I told her it was time for her to leave. Damon moved to stand beside me without saying a word, solid and steady, while I walked over and opened the front door. My mother stood there in the middle of my new living room, looking back and forth between the two of us like she couldn't quite believe what was happening. She asked if we could just talk, if I could give her a real chance to explain herself. I kept the door open, heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it, but my hand didn't shake on the doorknob. She gathered up her purse and the flowers she'd brought, walking past me with her head down, more tears streaking her face. I watched her get in her car and drive off before I finally closed the door, then leaned against it for a long moment, my legs feeling weak underneath me. After I checked upstairs that Lily was still asleep, her nightlight casting a soft glow through the crack in the door, Damon and I sat back down at the kitchen table. He apologized for ambushing me with all those documents, explaining that his investigators had put the file together, back when they were searching for me. The records laid out the full picture of everything I'd survived, and he'd kept them all this time in case I ever needed proof. We talked through what would happen next, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had already gone cold. I'd expected him to push for immediate visitation and family plans with Lily, but instead he surprised me by wanting to start with legal paternity confirmation before anything else. He said he wanted everything official and protected, that after managing on my own for so long, Lily and I deserved that kind of security. 2 days later, we met with Claire Bennett at her downtown office, the kind of place with thick carpet and framed law degrees lining the walls. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, dressed in a practical suit with a no-nonsense manner about her. Claire explained that Damon had hired her specifically to represent my interests, not his, and that even though he was covering her fees, she worked for me alone. She walked us through the process for a court-admissible DNA test, the kind that would hold up legally, if we ever needed it. It felt strange having a lawyer who answered only to me, but also safer than I'd expected it to feel. Claire asked detailed questions about what I wanted protected and what worried me most, taking notes the whole time on a yellow legal pad. She pulled out a folder of documents and walked us through the financial boundaries before any test results even came back. Damon agreed right away to put the back child support into an escrow account that would only release once paternity was confirmed through official channels. The house he'd bought went into my name with legal protections built in, so he couldn't take it back no matter what happened between us. I felt overwhelmed looking at all the paperwork, page after page of terms and clauses, but Claire broke down each section in plain language. She pointed out every safeguard she'd built in, every protection keeping Lily and me secure even if things went wrong. I signed wherever she indicated, my hand cramping by the end, grateful for every word standing between us and uncertainty. My phone buzzed just as we finished. A text from Renee warning me that Mom was calling every relative we had. She was telling them I'd kept John a secret out of spite, that I was being cruel by not letting her be a grandmother now. That old fear of being cut off from family hit me hard. The same feeling of isolation that had defined the last 5 years. But I reminded myself that most of those relatives had believed I was a stripper in Vegas anyway, that none of them had ever reached out when I actually needed help. That evening, I sat with Lily on her bed, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, while she looked up at me with curious eyes. I explained simply that a friend from Europe wanted to meet her, someone I'd known a long time ago before she was born. She asked if he was nice, and I told her we'd find out together, slowly, taking our time. I didn't use the word father yet because nothing was officially confirmed, and I wasn't going to make her a promise I couldn't keep. Lily gave a serious little nod, then wanted to know if this friend liked the same cartoons she did. I told her I honestly didn't know, but that was something she could find out herself, asking him questions and figuring out how she felt about him. By the end of that first week, we all met up at a public park on a sunny Saturday morning, one of those newer playgrounds with wood chips instead of concrete. Damon showed up with a plain soccer ball, nothing flashy about it, and asked Lily what her favorite color was and whether she liked playgrounds. She stayed shy at first, half hiding behind my leg, but curious enough to tell him purple was her favorite, and yes, she loved the swings. I hung back close by while the two of them passed the ball back and forth across the grass, Damon keeping every movement gentle, his voice easy and calm. At one point, Lily stopped the ball under her foot and asked why he talked funny, head tilted like she was working out a puzzle. He laughed, a real genuine laugh, and told her he came from Switzerland, where people talk a little different than we do here. She wanted to know if they had McDonald's over there too, and he said sure they did, just with the menu written in French and German instead of English. I noticed he kept everything age-appropriate and straightforward the whole time, never dangling big promises about trips or gifts, just answering her questions like her thoughts actually mattered. They kept kicking the ball around while I sat on a bench nearby, close enough to step in if I needed to, far enough to let them have their own moment. Lily loosened up a bit as they played, her movements less stiff than before, though she kept glancing back at me every few minutes just to make sure I was still there. On day 8, my mother left me a voicemail I ended up listening to twice before I deleted it. She said she forgave me for keeping Lily from her all those years, that she wanted us to move forward as a family now, for John's sake, that she was ready whenever I was. Listening to it made me angry at first, then just worn out. That deep, bone-tired kind of exhaustion you get from dealing with someone who won't understand, no matter what. I didn't call her back because I needed time to sit with it, and honestly, I was done rushing into things that only ended up hurting me. The phone just sat there quiet on my kitchen counter while I made Lily's lunch, spreading the peanut butter exactly how she likes it, and I realized not answering felt a whole lot better than trying to explain myself all over again. The next morning, I dropped Lily off at kindergarten and headed straight to work for the early shift. When my lunch break hit at noon, I walked 3 blocks over to the public library, the same one where I'd studied for my GED back when Lily was still a baby. I grabbed an empty computer in a back corner and looked up legal information on grandparents' rights in our state. The laws turned out to be narrow, requiring proof of an existing relationship or evidence that cutting off contact would actually harm the child. My mother had neither, but the sites warned that a determined grandparent could still file petitions and drag a family through court battles, running into thousands of dollars in legal fees. I opened a notebook and jotted down specific statutes, case names, filing requirements. Just gathering that information made the fear feel smaller somehow, more manageable, something I could actually prepare for instead of just sitting there dreading it. I snapped photos of the relevant pages on my phone and emailed them to Claire with a short note asking if this was something we should be worried about. Back at the restaurant, I tied my apron on and started taking orders for the dinner rush, half my mind still stuck on legal terminology. The next afternoon, my phone buzzed during break and Claire's name popped up on the screen. She wanted to set up a consultation specifically about protecting Lily and me from legal harassment, explaining we needed to build a paper trail and lock in clear boundaries before my mother could get any legal foothold. We landed on the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning, and I arranged to swap shifts with another server to make it work. That Friday night, 2 regular customers sat in my section, whispering just loud enough for me to catch it, something about the Mercedes with Swiss plates parked outside and whether I was dating some kind of prince. My face went hot, but I kept my pen steady on the order pad, focused on writing their orders down clearly. A few minutes later, my manager noticed me frozen by the kitchen door and quietly asked if I was okay, offering to switch me to different tables if people were bothering me. I told him I could handle it and thanked him, though my hands trembled a little as I carried plates back out to the floor. Saturday afternoon, Renee texted asking if we could grab coffee somewhere out of the way, and I picked a spot across town near the highway, somewhere nobody from our neighborhood would recognize us. She was already sitting in a corner booth when I got there, her college textbook spread open on the table, but her eyes gave away that she'd been crying. We ordered coffee, and she told me she wanted to support me, but was scared Mom would cut her off financially, that she was only halfway through her degree and couldn't afford to lose her tuition payments. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand, telling her I understood completely, and that she'd already helped more than anyone by sneaking us supplies during those awful years. We both cried a little. Quiet tears we wiped away fast, so the other customers wouldn't stare. The DNA test happened Monday morning at a medical office downtown, with official documentation and chain of custody steps that felt more serious than I'd expected. A technician in blue scrubs walked through each step while filling out labeled forms, then swabbed Lily's cheek and Damon's with long cotton sticks. Lily giggled and asked if they were checking for cavities like at the dentist, and Damon smiled and said something along those lines. We agreed without even saying it out loud, not to tell her what the test was really for, until we had confirmed results, keeping things simple and honest but not scary for her. Lily skipped out to the car chattering about how the stick tickled, while Damon and I traded a look that said we were both relieved it was finally over. Week 3 brought the lawyer consultation, where Claire laid out options across her conference table like cards in some complicated game. We could set up a formal custody arrangement through the courts, build privacy protocols to keep this whole situation out of gossip circles, and send a cease and desist letter to my mother if she kept harassing us. Having it all laid out clearly helped, even though the paperwork seemed endless. Stack after stack needing signatures and notarization, Damon and I spent 2 hours that afternoon drafting a co-parenting outline that started with supervised visits and built up gradually depending on how comfortable Lily felt. Claire suggested specific schedules with backup plans for holidays and sick days, which made everything feel manageable instead of overwhelming. We both signed the draft to show good faith while waiting on the test results, our signatures sitting official at the bottom of the page. Thursday. My phone rang during my dinner shift, and I saw the school's number pop up on the screen. The administrator's voice stayed calm but firm as she explained my mother had shown up at the office claiming to be the grandmother and asking about pickup procedures. I told my manager it was an emergency and left work right then, hands shaking with protective anger the whole 6-block drive to the school. The administrator assured me no information had been released and asked if I wanted to file a formal restriction to stop future incidents. I said yes without a second thought, filling out the paperwork right there in the office while Lily played on the playground, completely unaware of what had just happened. Through Claire, I sent my mother a written letter the next day, laying out a no-contact boundary and explaining that any further attempts to reach Lily or spread rumors through the family would mean legal action. Signing it left me sick with guilt, but also strangely powerful. Like for once in my life, I was choosing safety over keeping the peace. That night, after Lily fell asleep, I started a private journal, writing down every interaction, voicemail, and incident involving my mother. Claire said it could matter in court someday. But honestly, it also just helped me process everything, turning all the chaos into organized facts on paper. Writing down what actually happened made it harder to doubt myself later, building a record nobody could argue with or twist around. The next afternoon, Damon showed up at my apartment with a catalog from some European furniture company, pages marked up with sticky notes showing elaborate dollhouses running $3,000. He spread it open on my kitchen table and pointed to a Victorian-style mansion with working lights and hand-carved details, saying Lily deserved beautiful things after everything we'd struggled through. I stared at that price tag and felt my stomach twist. Because it was more than 2 months of my old rent, more than I'd spent furnishing our entire apartment, I told him it was too much too fast, that Lily was 5 and would be just as happy with a $30 plastic one from the toy store. He looked confused and a little hurt, like he genuinely couldn't understand why throwing money at everything wasn't the answer. We sat there 20 minutes talking it through until I explained that experiences mattered more than expensive things. That taking her to the children's museum or the zoo would build better memories than a dollhouse she'd outgrow in a year. Damon listened and actually shifted his thinking instead of pushing back, suggesting instead we plan a weekend trip to the science center with the interactive exhibits Lily loved, and that willingness to actually hear me and change course meant more than any gift he could have bought. 3 days later, the DNA results showed up by courier in an official envelope with lab seals and legal stamps. Damon came over that evening and we sat on my couch going through pages of genetic markers and probability percentages that just confirmed what we already knew. Deep down, we called Lily in from her room where she'd been coloring and sat her between us on the couch, keeping our voices calm and simple. Damon told her he was her daddy, that he'd been looking for us for a very long time. That he hadn't known about her before, but now he did, and he wanted to be part of her life. Lily took it in quietly, her face going serious the way kids' faces do when they're working through something big. Then she asked if this meant she had grandparents in Switzerland, the way her friend Maya had grandparents in California. We told her yes, that she had a whole family over there who wanted to meet her whenever she was ready, but only whenever she felt comfortable with it. She nodded and went back to coloring, like she needed some time alone with her thoughts. The next morning, I met with Claire at her office, and she recommended a child therapist named Diane Bennett, who worked specifically with kids going through big family changes. We booked an intake appointment for the following week, giving Lily a safe space to work through everything without us hovering over her. Claire made a point of saying that bringing in professional support wasn't admitting we'd failed. It was protecting Lily from getting overwhelmed by grown-up situations. I was starting to learn that asking for help didn't make me weak. It meant I was smart enough to know when we needed guidance. That same afternoon, my phone rang during my restaurant shift, and I saw a local area code I didn't recognize. The voicemail asked me to call back about a comment on some secret air story apparently spreading online. My hands started shaking as I listened to a reporter explain she'd heard about Damon's daughter and wanted to verify facts before running the story. I called Claire right away from the restaurant bathroom, voice tight with panic. She told me to activate the privacy plan we'd already talked through, meaning zero engagement with any media and letting the story just die out from lack of information. We agreed to say nothing publicly and treat silence as our best defense. 2 days after that, a thick envelope showed up in my mailbox with my mother's handwriting on the front. Inside was a 5-page letter mixing apology language with conditions and demands. She was sorry for her mistakes, sure, but she also listed out every place she wanted to take Lily and floated the idea of a family trip to Switzerland together. She wrote about how much she'd missed us and how families are supposed to forgive. But every single paragraph came loaded with strings attached, and the expectation that I'd just forget 5 years of being abandoned. Reading it twice, I recognized the manipulation pattern, clear as day, saw exactly how she was trying to force her way back in by acting like everything was already forgiven and we were one big happy family again. She wanted access to Lily's world and Damon's. Without actually earning back any trust or proving anything had changed, that letter went straight into my documentation folder with all the other evidence. The following Tuesday, I met with Diane at her office while Damon waited out in the lobby. She asked detailed questions about Lily's routine, her personality, how she'd handled changes before, what worried me most about this whole transition. Then Damon came in, and the two of us walked through the situation from our different angles, while Diane took notes. After about an hour, she brought Lily in for a session with toys and art supplies, keeping everything gentle and age-appropriate. Lily drew pictures and played with dollhouse figures, while Diane asked casual questions about her family and feelings. At the end, Diane told us to keep Lily's schedule as predictable as possible and bring in changes gradually, letting Lily set the pace on building the relationship. She gave us specific scripts for handling hard topics and ways to check in with Lily without it feeling like an interrogation. That night, Renee texted, asking if I'd consider supervised limited contact with our mother, just to lower the chance she'd file for grandparents' rights out of spite. I sat there staring at my phone, torn between wanting to protect Renee from getting stuck in the middle and knowing full well my mother hadn't earned access to Lily yet. Part of me wanted to make things easier on my sister, who'd already sacrificed so much helping us secretly all those years, but another part of me knew that giving into manipulation just to dodge conflict was exactly how my mother had controlled everyone for decades. I told Renee I needed to think it over and talk to my lawyer first. The next morning, Claire walked me through the legal requirements for grandparents' petitions in our state, showing me the exact statutes that said, without an existing relationship, my mother had almost no standing to demand visitation. She suggested offering mediation first as a good faith move, one that would also create legal documentation if my mother refused to be reasonable or came in with unrealistic demands. That way we could show a judge we'd actually tried to work things out and she'd been the one blocking it. I agreed to try mediation, but only with strict conditions written out ahead of time about what contact would look like and which boundaries weren't up for negotiation. That afternoon, I found another note from the reporter stuck in my apartment door, this one offering to meet off the record just to hear my side. Before the story got twisted by other sources, I stood there holding the paper, tempted to set the record straight and take control of the narrative myself. Then I remembered what Claire had warned, that engaging at all just fed the story more attention, that silence was the fastest way to make it boring and irrelevant. I tore the note up and tossed it in the trash. The following week, at Lily's second therapy session, Diane had her draw a picture of her family and how she felt. Lily drew herself in the middle, with a thought bubble full of question marks floating above her head. When Diane gently asked what she was wondering about, Lily said she was scared her daddy would go away again like before. Even though she understood it wasn't really his fault he hadn't known about her, hearing her put that fear into words actually helped us deal with it head on instead of just pretending everything was fine. That weekend, Damon showed up with a big craft store bag, and we sat at the kitchen table with Lily between us. He pulled out a blank monthly calendar with big squares for each day, and 2 sheets of stickers, airplanes, video cameras, hearts, stars. Lily's eyes lit up, and she went straight for the stickers, while Damon explained we were making a special chart to show when he'd visit and when they'd talk on the computer. I watched her sort through the stickers carefully. Purple hearts for video call days, gold stars for in-person visits. Damon showed her how to count the days between visits, pointing at each square and letting her stick them on herself. She put them on a little crooked and overlapping, but she was so focused and serious about the whole thing. Once we finished, she wanted it up on her wall, right away, so we taped it beside her bed where she'd see it first thing every morning. She stood back admiring it. Then asked if she could add extra stickers for special days like her birthday. Damon said sure and just handed her the whole sheet, and watching the two of them plan it out together, I felt something tight in my chest ease up a little 3 days later. Damon called while I was folding laundry and asked if his parents could have a few photos of Lily for their private family album. My whole body went stiff, and I set down the shirt I was holding, told him I needed to think it over, and we'd talk later. After we hung up, I sat there feeling my walls slam right back up, picturing strangers across the ocean holding pictures of my daughter. That night, I talked it through with Claire, and she helped me see that some photo sharing was reasonable as long as I set strict rules around it. The next day, I told Damon he could have 3 pictures, ones I'd pick myself, with a written agreement that nothing ever went on social media, and the photos stayed within his immediate family only. He agreed, without pushing back at all, and thanked me for trusting him even that much. I picked out 3 photos from the last month. Lily reading a book, playing at the park, smiling at the camera. Sending them felt like handing over pieces of her I couldn't protect anymore. But I did it anyway because Damon had earned that much trust. The next morning, I woke up to 5 missed calls from Renee, called her back, and she told me to check Mom's Facebook page right away. I opened the app with my stomach already twisting and found a new album called My Precious Girls. About 20 old photos of me and Renee as kids, captions going on about cherished memories and unbreakable family bonds, and how blessed she was to have such beautiful daughters, pictures from birthdays and holidays I barely even remembered, every single one from before I got pregnant, not one photo from the last 5 years, because she hadn't been there for any of it. The comments were full of relatives gushing about the sweet memories, and what a wonderful mother she must be. Reading it made me sick. Watching her rewrite the whole history for anyone who didn't know the truth, Renee had already screenshotted every photo and caption and sent it all to me as documentation. She said she wanted me to have proof of what Mom was doing. In case it mattered later, I saved everything into a folder on my phone labeled evidence and tried to turn the hurt into something useful instead of letting it spiral me back into old patterns of doubt. That afternoon, Claire called to say she'd arranged mediation with Nora Bennett, a woman who worked with families in conflict. The session got scheduled for 2 weeks out, and the ground rules were already written into the agreement. My mother had to apologize specifically for each action she'd taken, commit to starting therapy within a week, and accept in writing that any contact with Lily was entirely my decision. With no guaranteed timeline, Claire said my mother's lawyer had already reviewed the terms and agreed to attend. I was surprised she'd accept conditions that strict, but Claire reminded me my mother probably figured she could charm her way through mediation and still end up getting what she wanted. We'd just have to see if she actually followed through or if this was another manipulation. 2 nights later, I worked the dinner shift and everything was normal, right up until table 12. A regular who came in every Thursday sat down and I took his order like always. When I brought his food out, he looked up with a smirk and said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, that he'd heard I landed myself a rich Swiss guy, and was I sure I hadn't trapped him on purpose? I froze for a second, plate still in my hand, face burning. Then I set the plate down carefully and told him that was completely inappropriate, and he needed to stop. He laughed it off like a joke, but my manager had already caught it from across the room. She walked over and calmly told him he needed to pay his bill and leave. He tried arguing, but she held firm, said the restaurant didn't tolerate customers harassing staff. He threw cash on the table and left while other customers watched. My manager squeezed my shoulder and told me to take 5 minutes in the back. I stood in the kitchen shaking, angry but also relieved. Someone had actually backed me up the next Monday. Damon and I met with our lawyers at Claire's office. She'd prepared a temporary parenting plan laying everything out in careful detail. Damon would visit every other weekend, 8 hours on Saturday, with Wednesday evening video calls. Financial support would run through a structured account with documentation, and any major decisions about Lily's education, health, or activities needed both of us to agree. Everything got typed up officially with signatures and witness lines. Damon and I sat across from each other at the conference table and signed multiple copies. Having it all documented in legal language felt safer than just trusting each other's word. The structure protected Lily most of all, making sure neither of us could make sudden changes without going through proper process. Claire filed it with the court that same afternoon, so it became part of the official record. The mediation happened on a gray Thursday morning at Nora's downtown office. My mother showed up exactly on time, nice dress, tissues tucked in her purse. Nora sat between us and went over the ground rules before we started. My mother started crying almost immediately, saying she'd been young and scared herself when I got pregnant, that she'd made a terrible mistake. But then she started tacking on justifications, something about trying to teach me responsibility. Thinking tough love was the right approach, I stayed calm even though my heart was pounding, and I cut her off, told her I needed her to acknowledge specific actions without the excuses. I listed each thing out loud, asked her to confirm she remembered kicking me out with 2 hours' notice, changing the locks, cutting off all contact for 5 years, telling family I was dead to her. She cried harder, but kept trying to explain her reasoning anyway. Nora stepped in and said the exercise required acknowledgement, not justification. My mother struggled with that, clearly wanting to defend herself, but eventually agreed to write it all down as homework. Nora scheduled a follow-up session 2 weeks out to go over what she wrote the next day. I met with Diane to talk through the mediation. She'd read Nora's notes carefully and asked how I felt about the session. I told her it was harder than I expected hearing my mother cry, but that I was glad I'd pushed for real accountability. Diane helped me think through whether supervised contact could eventually be safe for Lily, said my mother would need to show sustained change over time, not just apologize once and expect access, and together we worked out specific criteria for that. 6 months of weekly therapy with proof of attendance, written accountability for her actions without excuses or justification, respecting every boundary I set without pushback or manipulation. Only once she'd met all 3 requirements consistently would we even consider a supervised meeting between her and Lily. The timeline felt right. It gave my mother a real chance to do the work while still protecting Lily from someone who hadn't proven herself trustworthy. Yet Saturday morning, the reporter's story finally ran on a local online news site. I made myself read it over coffee, braced for the worst, but it turned out respectful. Focused on privacy rights for families dealing with complicated situations. She'd fact-checked everything, and since I'd declined to comment, most of it stayed speculation about legal boundaries that died down within 2 days. I felt relieved it wasn't the gossip piece I'd feared. A few people at work mentioned seeing it, but nobody pushed for details. That same afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Renee. Mom had apparently been texting her all morning, complaining that I was keeping her grandchild from her, asking Renee to talk to me on her behalf. But this time, Renee didn't forward any of it or try to mediate between us. Instead, she texted saying she'd told Mom directly to work with a mediator and that she was done trying to be the go-between, said Mom needed to earn her way back into our lives through her own actions. I texted back thanking her, told her I was proud of her for setting that boundary, felt like Renee was finally finding her own voice instead of just trying to keep everyone happy. The next morning, Damon called while I was making Lily breakfast and asked if we could meet at the park near my apartment to talk about his schedule. I agreed, and we sat on a bench while Lily played on the swings 20 feet away where I could still see her. He pulled up his phone calendar and suggested staying a full week instead of the 3 days we'd planned, said his family wanted more time with Lily and he could work remotely from the hotel. I felt my shoulders tense up and told him the therapist had been clear about gradual increases, that jumping from 3 days to 7 was too much too fast for Lily. He looked frustrated, ran a hand through his hair, started arguing she seemed fine. I cut him off and explained that just because she seemed okay didn't mean we should push harder, that kids often show stress later, in unexpected ways. He sat quiet a minute, watching Lily pump her legs on the swing, then nodded. Said he understood even though it was hard leaving when things were going well. I appreciated that he actually listened instead of pushing back, that he was willing to slow down even when it went against what he wanted. We agreed to stick with 3 days this visit and add 1 more day next month. If Lily handled the transition well, felt like we were actually learning to work together instead of just each giving something up to keep the peace. 3 days later, I got an email from Nora with an attachment showing my mother had completed her first therapy intake appointment. Proof came as a signed form from a licensed therapist confirming the date and time, along with a treatment plan outline for weekly sessions going forward. I stared at that document a long time, wanting to feel hopeful but mostly just feeling skeptical. One appointment didn't erase 5 years of abandonment or undo decades of her being controlling and conditional. Nora's email stayed professional and neutral. Noting the progress without inflating it into more than it was, she reminded me, sustained change takes months, not weeks, that this was just the first concrete step. I saved it to the folder I'd made for all the mediation documentation, adding it to the growing pile of evidence tracking everything. That afternoon, I drove out to my old neighborhood for the first time since we'd moved, parked outside the building where Lily and I had lived in that moldy studio for 3 years. The paint was still peeling off the front door. The parking lot still had the same potholes filled with oily water. I sat there with the engine running, windows up, and the memories hit me like a physical weight. That smell of mildew that never fully went away, no matter how much bleach I used. Lily crying from hunger while I waited for my paycheck to clear so I could buy formula. Walking 4 miles to work in the dark because the bus didn't run early enough for my shift. Counting coins to see if I had enough for the laundromat, or if we'd be wearing dirty clothes another week. That fear that lived in my chest every single day, the constant calculation of which bill to skip so we could still eat. I gripped the steering wheel and reminded myself why I stayed so careful now. That was why I questioned everything, built safety nets, refused to rush into trusting people. That wasn't paranoia, or me being difficult. That was wisdom I'd earned surviving when nobody helped us, the instinct that had kept Lily and me alive when we had nothing. I pulled away from the building after 10 minutes and drove home to our safe apartment with working heat and no roaches, grateful but still angry underneath about how hard it had all been. Lily had a rough bedtime that night, crying into her pillow about feeling confused. I sat on the edge of her bed and asked what was confusing her. She said she didn't get why she had to go to Damon's hotel sometimes, instead of him always coming to our place, that having 2 houses felt weird, not knowing which one was really home. My chest ached watching her try to work through something that just didn't make sense at her age. I grabbed her favorite stuffed rabbit off the shelf and told her we'd build a special routine just for going between houses. We practiced it together right there in her room. First, she'd pack the rabbit in her little backpack, then we'd sing the ABCs together while she put her shoes on, then she'd give me 3 hugs and I'd give her 3 kisses before she left. And coming back home, we'd just do it all in reverse. She stopped crying and made me run through it 5 times until she felt sure she'd remember. By the end, she was giggling at me, pretending to forget what letter comes after M. I tucked her in and promised we'd do the ritual every single time, that it would help her feel steady even when the location changed. The mediation follow-up happened Tuesday morning at Nora's office. My mother showed up 10 minutes early, sitting in the waiting room with a folder on her lap. Nora called us back, and we sat in the same chairs as before, same distance apart. My mother opened her folder and pulled out 3 handwritten pages. Nora asked her to read them out loud. Her voice shook as she started listing specific things she'd done, kicking me out with 2 hours' notice when I was 18 and pregnant, changing the locks so I couldn't get back in, refusing to answer Renee's calls when she begged for help, getting me into a shelter, telling extended family I'd run off to be a stripper instead of admitting I was homeless. Never once showing up at the hospital when Lily was born, even though Renee told her exactly which one, living 20 minutes away for 5 years and never checking once if we were even alive. The list ran on for both pages. She cried through reading it, but didn't stop to make excuses or explain herself. When she finished, she looked at me and said she was sorry for each specific thing. It wasn't a perfect apology. I could tell some part of her still wanted to defend herself, but it was more honest than anything she'd said up to that point. I sat there letting the words land without rushing to comfort her or tell her it was fine. After a long silence, I told her I accepted it as a first step, not as absolution that she'd still need to keep proving herself through actions. Nora took notes and scheduled our next check-in for a month out. I met with my restaurant manager the next day during the slow stretch between lunch and dinner, explained I needed to adjust my schedule to be home for Lily's bedtime routine on the nights Damon wasn't visiting. He pulled up the staff calendar on his tablet, and we worked through it together. I'd drop 2 evening shifts a week and pick up the busy lunch shifts instead, which actually paid better because of higher table turnover and a business lunch crowd that tipped more consistently. He said I'd earned first pick on the schedule after 3 reliable years, and that he'd rather work with me than lose me to another restaurant. I thanked him, felt a small surge of relief that this piece was falling into place. The logistics were slowly adding up, each one making the whole situation feel more stable, less like it could collapse any second. Damon and I spent 2 hours at a coffee shop drafting a joint statement for Lily's school, kept it simple and factual. Lily's father had recently been located after a long search. We were setting up a co-parenting arrangement. Both of us asked that any questions or concerns go to us privately instead of being discussed with other parents or staff. Asked that Lily be supported without being made to feel different or like she was some subject of gossip. Damon emailed it to the principal, who called me that afternoon, said she appreciated us being proactive and agreed to brief Lily's teacher and the front office staff privately. They'd note pickup authorization in the system and redirect any questions straight to us, she promised. They'd watch for any signs Lily was struggling and let us know right away. I hung up feeling like we'd shielded her from at least one source of potential drama. Diane called Friday afternoon, said she'd gone through all the mediation notes and my mother's therapy documentation, and felt comfortable clearing a short supervised meeting between me and my mother before we even considered any contact with Lily. It would happen at the mediation office with Nora present, so we'd have a neutral, safe space. If it went badly, Lily wouldn't be affected at all because she'd never know it happened. If it went well, we could think about next steps. I agreed, and we set it for the following Thursday. Spent the whole week after that anxious, practicing what I wanted to say, writing things down, and crossing them out, trying to prepare for a conversation I had no idea how to actually have. The supervised meeting turned out harder than I expected. I sat across from my mother in Nora's office, a box of tissues sitting on the table between us. Nora went over the ground rules, then asked my mother to read her written apology. Longer this time than what she'd read at mediation. Covering all 5 years in detail, she listed specific times she'd refused help, specific lies she'd told the family, specific moments she'd chosen, pride over my survival, talked about getting Renee's call that I'd given birth alone and choosing not to go to the hospital, described seeing Lily's picture for the first time 2 years later and feeling nothing because she'd convinced herself I deserved whatever happened to me. Her voice broke more than once, but she kept reading. When she finished, she set the papers down and just cried. No explaining, no defending. I sat there and let it land. Let myself actually feel the anger and hurt instead of pushing it down to make her feel better. After a few minutes, I told her I heard what she said. I didn't tell her I forgave her because I wasn't there yet, didn't say it was okay because it wasn't. But I acknowledged she'd done the work of writing it honestly and reading it without excuses. Nora asked what I needed from her going forward. I said consistent therapy, respect for every boundary I set, and time to prove she'd actually changed. We spent the rest of the session working out what limited contact might look like. No overnight visits with Lily until further notice, no unsupervised time alone with her for at least 6 months, reviews every 3 months based on how Lily was doing, and as long as she kept up therapy, she could be called grandma, but under strict rules that could get pulled back the second she crossed a line. She agreed to all of it without arguing or pushing for more, said she understood she'd destroyed my trust, and that earning it back would take years, not months. Nora wrote everything down and said she'd send a written summary within 2 days. I left that office exhausted, but also feeling like the boundaries were finally clear and fair. My mother would have a place in Lily's life, but with training wheels that wouldn't come off until she'd proven herself trustworthy through sustained action over time. Lily's birthday was 3 weeks out, and I spent one Tuesday evening making a list of what we'd need for a park party: balloons, paper plates, a sheet cake from the grocery store, maybe some simple games like tag and duck duck goose. Damon stopped by that night, dropping off papers from Claire, and spotted my notebook on the kitchen table, asked what I was planning, and I explained the park idea, how Lily's kindergarten friends would come and we'd keep it simple and fun. He went quiet a minute, then suggested he could hire an event company that did princess parties, maybe rent out a venue with activities. I appreciated the thought, but told him no, that 6-year-olds didn't need anything fancy. Lily would have more fun just running around with her friends eating cake. He looked a little disappointed, but then asked what he could do to help instead, so I put him in charge of decorations and games, gave him a $50 budget and a list of dollar store items we needed. The next day, he texted me pictures of streamers and balloons he'd picked out, asking if the colors worked together, and it felt normal in a way that mattered, more than any expensive party could have. My mother called 2 days later while I was folding laundry, asked if Lily might want to visit Switzerland for her birthday, maybe see the Alps, stay at one of the family hotels. I stopped mid-fold and told her flatly that wasn't happening, that we were sticking to small local visits for now and international travel was completely off the table. She tried pushing back gently, said it'd be educational for Lily, and the family really wanted to meet her. I repeated myself, firmer this time, explaining that rebuilding trust meant respecting boundaries without arguing every single time she went quiet, then said okay, that she understood. No guilt trip, no manipulation, just acceptance. I hung up feeling surprised, a little hopeful even, that maybe the therapy was actually working. Claire scheduled a meeting at her office Friday afternoon to finalize everything legally. She had a stack of papers spread across the conference table when Damon and I got there: the parenting plan with our agreed schedule, the child support trust structure, documents for filing everything with the court. We spent 2 hours going through each section, making sure we both understood what we were signing. Claire walked through how the trust worked, money flowing in monthly, but I'd work with a financial advisor to manage it responsibly. She'd already set up an appointment for me with someone who specialized in helping people who'd suddenly come into money, teaching them to budget and invest instead of just spending it. The advisor's name was printed right on a business card she handed me. First meeting set for the following Tuesday. Damon signed everything without hesitation, and I signed too, my hand shaking a little because it all felt so official, so permanent. Claire said she'd file the parenting plan with the court by Monday, that we'd have legally recognized co-parent status within a few weeks. Walking out of that office, the ground under my feet finally felt solid instead of constantly shifting. Damon asked if I wanted to grab coffee and talk, so we headed to a quiet place a few blocks away. He looked nervous, stirring sugar into his espresso, then admitted his father, Victor, had been calling him every other day about settling down, kept hinting I'd be an acceptable match given Lily's existence, that it would legitimize everything, clean up the whole family situation. My stomach dropped because I'd worried something like this might come up eventually. Damon quickly added, he'd already told his father no, that romance wasn't on the table right now, maybe not ever, that we needed to be stable co-parents first, and that had to come before some arranged relationship just to make his family happy. Said the respectful distance we were keeping mattered more than any grand gesture, that proving we could work together for Lily was what actually counted. I thanked him for being upfront and agreed completely, relieved we were on the same page. Some things mattered more than a fairy tale ending, and Lily's stability was one of them. Nora sent an update email the next week saying my mother had completed 3 therapy sessions, and the therapist noted she was engaging seriously with the work. The email added that real change takes months or years, not weeks, but the early signs were encouraging. I read it twice, felt my automatic skepticism soften just a little into something that might eventually turn into conditional trust. I wasn't ready to believe she'd changed yet, but I could watch her actions, see if they stayed consistent over time. Words were easy, but showing up to therapy every week and respecting boundaries without complaint was the harder part. The first supervised visit happened on a Wednesday afternoon at a family center downtown. I drove Lily there and walked her inside where a staff member met us in the lobby. My mother was already in the visit room, sitting at a small table with coloring books and crayons laid out. I stayed in the building but not in the room. Sitting in the waiting area with a book I couldn't focus on, the staff member had gone over the rules with my mother beforehand. No gifts, no promises about future visits, no asking Lily to keep secrets, just simple conversation and activities together. After an hour, the door opened and Lily came out holding a colored picture of a butterfly. My mother followed behind, keeping her distance, not trying to hug Lily goodbye, thanked the staff member, and left through the side exit like we'd agreed. Lily stayed quiet in the car, and I didn't push her to talk right away. Once we got home, I made her a snack and sat with her at the kitchen table. Gently asked how she felt about seeing her grandmother. Lily said Grandma seemed nice, but also sad, that they'd colored together and talked about favorite animals. She wasn't sure if she wanted to see her again soon, maybe in a while, but not next week. I told her that was completely fine, that she got to set the pace and nobody would force anything. Her mixed feelings made total sense to me, and I was proud of her for being honest about them. We agreed to think it over and talk to the therapist at our next appointment before scheduling another visit. Lily's birthday party happened on a sunny Saturday morning. At the park near our apartment, kids started showing up around 10, parents dropping them off with wrapped presents and promises to pick them up by noon. Damon showed up early to help me set up, hanging streamers from the pavilion posts and arranging the folding tables. Lily ran around with her friends playing tag, laughing so hard she got hiccups. We did simple games, musical chairs, red light, green light, then brought out the cake with its messy grocery store frosting and 6 candles. Everyone sang, and she blew them all out in one breath, her face just glowing. My mother arrived at 11 for her supervised 30-minute window, stood at the edge of the pavilion watching quietly. No gifts, just like we'd asked, just herself, smiled when Lily waved at her between games. When her time was up, she said goodbye to Lily without any drama and walked back to her car, leaving exactly when she was supposed to. I watched her go and felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the start of hope that this could actually work if she kept following the rules. Renee met me for lunch the following Tuesday, at a sandwich place halfway between our apartments. She looked different somehow, more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. Over Turkey Club sandwiches, she told me she'd set a boundary with our mother, said she wasn't going to listen to complaints about me anymore, that if Mom wanted to talk about me, she could do it with her therapist instead. Mom pushed back at first, but Renee held firm, and now their conversations were shorter, but a lot less toxic. We talked about what it meant to be sisters instead of just two people who'd survived the same difficult mother, made plans to hang out more, build something of our own separate from all the family drama. Felt good having an ally who understood exactly where I'd been and wasn't asking me to forgive faster than I was ready to. The community college sent my acceptance letter for spring semester on Thursday. I'd applied weeks earlier, but hadn't let myself believe it would actually happen. 3 classes to start: business fundamentals, English composition, intro to accounting. The schedule lined up perfectly with Lily's kindergarten hours and Damon's visit days, and that financial stress that used to crush me just wasn't there anymore. I could afford textbooks without choosing between them and groceries, could actually focus on studying instead of working double shifts. Sitting at my kitchen table with that acceptance letter, I thought about the future I'd always wanted for Lily and me, the one I'd been building toward through 5 years of hell, and just surviving. It was finally becoming real, not because someone swooped in and rescued me, but because I'd fought for it and now had the support to make it happen. The ground felt solid under my feet for the first time in 6 years, and I was ready to keep moving. Damon left for Switzerland on a Tuesday morning, and Lily stood at the window watching his car disappear down the street, hand pressed against the glass. We'd already set up the video call schedule before he left, specific times marked on her calendar with special stickers she'd picked out herself. That first call happened at bedtime. She showed him her room through the tablet, pointed at her toys, talked about kindergarten. He listened close and asked questions. And when we hung up, she counted the days until his next visit using the stickers stuck on the wall calendar. The system held up better than I expected, gave her something concrete to track instead of just waiting and wondering. She knew when to expect him, and that made the distance easier somehow. Turned his absence into something manageable instead of scary. My mother kept going to therapy every week, and I got attendance confirmations from her counselor like we'd required. We set up monthly supervised visits with checkpoints every 3 months to review whether the arrangement was actually working for Lily. The pace felt slow, but that was on purpose, putting Lily's security ahead of my mother's wants. She showed up on time for visits, followed the rules without pushing back, didn't try to manipulate her way into more access. The lack of drama surprised me more than anything, honestly, because I'd braced for her to test boundaries or start making demands. Instead, she seemed to actually get that this was her only way back, and she had to walk it carefully. Renee started meeting me for coffee every other week, and we talked about things that had nothing to do with our mother, building something of our own separate from all the old family problems. Late one evening, after Lily fell asleep, I sat in our living room with the lights off, just thinking. The apartment quiet and safe, nothing like those first nights in the shelter when Lily slept in a dresser drawer because I couldn't afford a crib. The contrast between then and now hit hard. How far we'd come from that county hospital where I'd given birth alone. I thought about the roaches in our old studio. Customers grabbing at me for $2 tips, walking 4 miles to work in the dark. Those memories didn't fade just because things got better, and I didn't want them to, needed to remember where we'd been, so I'd never take this stability for granted. Gratitude and caution lived together in my chest, both equally real, both necessary. Our new normal was messy and structured and completely ours. Lily had 2 parents who talked respectfully and coordinated schedules, who put her needs first even when it was hard. A grandmother earning her way back in with strict boundaries and regular checkpoints. An aunt becoming a real friend instead of just a scared sister. And a mother who'd survived hell and built something solid, who knew exactly what it cost to get here. Everyone ended up in a steadier place than where they started. Not perfect, but genuinely better.